The first noise wasn't loud, but sharp enough to cut through the stale darkness of the abandoned hospital. A tiny click, too clean to be settling metal, too intentional to be an accident. It snapped from somewhere beyond the dark stretch of hallway, and before I could breathe, a fluorescent bulb above me flicked on with a cold hum. This place hadn't had power in years, so how did the light know I was here? The glow spread a thin, sickly layer across peeled walls that curled like brittle skin, floor tiles broken into crooked edges, and chairs pushed against one another as if trying to hide. Then a second light blinked on. One floor below, slow, steady, climbing upward in a pattern that felt almost thoughtful. Why would an empty building wake itself floor by floor? The air thickened with a vibration that brushed my shoes, and far down the corridor came a faint tap, a single metallic knock that repeated once more before freezing mid-echo, as if waiting for someone to answer it. The silence after the knock stretched so long it felt deliberate, like the building was holding still to see what I'd do next. I stepped forward, and each footfall echoed louder than the last, bouncing in directions that didn't match the shape of the hallway. The air grew warmer, even though the walls still sweated cold moisture, and a sour smell rose from somewhere ahead, not strong but sharp enough to sting the edges of my breathing. As I passed a doorway, the darkness inside seemed thicker than the shadows around it, as if the room swallowed light instead of lacking it. Somewhere above, another bulb buzzed to life, its glow pressing downward like a spotlight, trying to reveal something just behind me. I didn't turn, not yet. The building felt aware. Its noises too timed, its stillness too careful. And in the moment the next click sounded, distant but exact, I realized the lights weren't turning on randomly. They were tracing my path. The corridor led into a wide waiting area where overturned chairs formed crooked circles, as if people once gathered in a hurry and left with equal urgency. The floor was littered with old pamphlets that rasped when the faint airflow pushed them across the tiles. Something about the space felt wrong. Too open. Too expectant. Like a stage missing only the cue to begin. I scanned the room, sensing movement, though nothing shifted, and then a light flickered on inside a nearby office, its glass window smeared with grime. The glow inside was steady, almost warm, which made it feel even more out of place in a dead building. When I stepped closer, the buzzing stopped abruptly, leaving the room dim again. A shadow in the far corner collapsed inward as though someone had just stepped back out of view. I waited, breath shallow, but the only response was the soft clatter of something rolling deeper into the darkness. Past the waiting area, the hallway narrowed again, ceiling lower and lights spaced farther apart. Each flicker overhead felt timed to my movement, blinking on just long enough for me to step beneath, before fading back into dim silence. I reached a junction where two corridors branched off, one swallowed in darkness, the other faintly lit by a dying bulb. The faint scent of disinfectant lingered here, strangely fresh, too recent for a place untouched for years. When a sudden thud hit the door behind me, the sound didn't echo. It stayed thick, heavy, as though absorbed by something dense. I froze, listening, but whatever caused it didn't follow with another sound. The tension in the air tightened, almost electric, and I felt a slow vibration through the floorboards, like footsteps far below rising toward me. The next light flicked on down the darker hallway. Not ahead, but off to the side, leading somewhere I hadn't planned to go. The newly lit hallway felt colder, as if the bulb's glow drained warmth instead of giving it. The tiles beneath my steps clicked unevenly, some cracking softly, others sounding hollow as though empty space rested beneath them. The walls here were stripped bare. No signs left, no paint, only long scrapes cutting across the surface in erratic paths. A low humming filled the air, almost like a distant generator, but too rhythmic, too controlled. As I moved farther in, the light at the entrance flickered out, leaving only the single bulb above me, its circle of visibility shrinking with each pulse. Then a whisper-thin draft brushed behind me, not cold, but steady, as if something moved through the air instead of the air moving on its own. When I turned, the hallway behind was dark, completely. Yet I swore I heard soft steps retreating, not approaching. Whatever controlled the lights wasn't just guiding me. It was circling me. The darkness behind me pressed closer, as if it had weight, nudging at my back with a silent insistence that made every step forward feel forced. The single bulb above hummed weakly, its glow trembling like it might give up at any second. Up ahead, the hall curved slightly, blocking whatever waited beyond the bend. But something there breathed faintly. Slow, steady, calm. The sound wasn't loud, yet it filled the space like a presence too large for the corridor. My footsteps softened on the tiles, each one quieter than the last, until it felt like the building was swallowing the noise on purpose. When I reached the curve, the breathing stopped, leaving a sudden vacuum of silence that tightened around my ribs. Then a soft scrape echoed from the far corner, almost playful, as if something dragged just enough to make me notice, but not enough to reveal itself. The next bulb snapped on farther down the hall, bright and immediate, shining on a doorway that hadn't been open before. The newly opened doorway revealed a small storage room, cramped and heavy with dust. Metal shelves lined both sides, some bent, others empty, all coated in a thick layer of undisturbed grime. Yet, the center of the floor was perfectly clean, as if someone had stood there recently. The air inside felt still, but not stale, almost as though someone had just stepped out moments before I approached. I moved closer, and the bulb overhead flickered once, twice, then steadied with an unnatural sharpness. A single piece of folded paper lay on the nearest shelf, its edges crisp despite the decay around it. I reached for it, but a sudden gust of warm air glided past my arm, pushing the paper off the shelf as if slapped from an invisible hand. It drifted down slowly, unnervingly slow, landing at my feet. Before I bent to pick it up, the shelves creaked in a chain reaction, each metal groan sounding like a warning shifting through the room. The paper held nothing but a single dark smudge across its center, like a fingerprint dragged downward in haste. I turned it over, but the back was blank, clean, almost new. The moment I stepped out of the storage room, the door slammed with such force the walls shuddered. I stumbled forward, gripping the smudged paper tightly as footsteps echoed above me. Slow, heavy, measured. They didn't roam the upper floor. They traced a straight path, one that matched mine exactly. Each thud aligned with my last location, as though something walked in perfect rhythm with my movements. I tested it, stepping quietly to the right. A pause above, then a single matching step. The lights ahead flared to life in a narrow row, bright enough to guide but too controlled to feel accidental. The pattern wasn't random anymore. The building wasn't just watching, it was following. I moved toward the lit path cautiously, each bulb humming louder as I stepped beneath it, as if reacting to my presence. A cold draft swept through the hall, disturbing old papers that slid across the floor like restless insects. When I reached the midpoint, a sudden bang erupted from behind, sharp enough to jolt my chest. I spun around, but the hallway was empty, silent, unmoving. Then, slowly, a light at the far end flickered on, not overhead, but inside a room I didn't recognize. The door there eased open with a low groan, stopping halfway like it expected me to enter. The gap revealed only a slice of darkness, too thick to see into, yet something faint ticked from inside, a rhythmic tapping spaced evenly like a heartbeat played on metal. The steady pulse pulled at my focus, tempting, steady, unnatural. It felt less like a sound and more like a signal calling me toward it. I approached the half-open door, each step shrinking the visual world around me as the hall behind dimmed bulb by bulb until only the room ahead remained lit. The tapping continued. Soft, metallic, too steady to be random. When I reached the doorway, The bulb inside flared too bright for a moment, forcing me to shield my eyes. As they adjusted, I saw the room was empty except for two objects placed neatly at its center. An old hospital clipboard and a cracked intercom speaker lying on its side. The tapping came from the speaker, though it wasn't connected to anything. It vibrated faintly with each sound, rocking gently like something knocked against it from inside. A rush of stale warmth swept past my face, pushing the door wider with a long, drawn breath. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. Then a single word crackled through the dead speaker, too distorted to understand, but unmistakably spoken. The distorted word hung in the air long after the speaker went silent, sinking into the room like it didn't want to leave. I stepped closer, watching the intercom's cracked surface twitch, as if still catching the echo of whatever spoke through it. The clipboard beside it lay open, pages curled from age, yet one sheet in the center looked untouched. When I reached for it, the overhead light dimmed suddenly, sinking the corners of the room into a muddy blur. A faint scrape brushed behind me, gentle but unmistakable, like fingertips dragging across the floor. I didn't turn immediately. Something about the sound felt patient, almost curious. When I finally looked back, the hallway outside had shifted, lights now glowing in a staggered pattern that didn't match the order I'd walked through. The air tightened around me, warmer now, as though breath pressed against the back of my neck. Another scrape followed, this one closer, then stopped before I could trace its direction. The lights in the hallway blinked in a slow sequence, spreading outward like the building was choosing a direction for me. Each bulb lit with a soft hum. Not the loud crackle from earlier, but a smooth, deliberate swell. I stepped out of the room and the intercom behind me crackled once more, releasing a short, clipped breath that didn't sound like static. I ignored it and followed the lights as they drew me down a corridor lined with partially open doors. Every few steps, a faint movement flickered at the edge of my vision. A curtain swaying with no breeze, a bed shifting as its wheels settled, a shadow tightening, then disappearing when I focused on it. The hallway gradually widened, leading to a large double door cracked open just enough to show a slice of pale green light. It pulsed faintly, almost alive, spreading across the floor in uneven waves. Whatever waited inside wasn't hiding. It was inviting. The green glow inside the room felt unnatural, like it came from something organic rather than any working equipment. I stepped through the double doors and found what looked like an old observation ward, curtains torn, monitors dark, the faint smell of dust mixing with something damp and metallic. At the center stood a single examination table with straps dangling loosely from its sides. Above it, a light fixture swayed slowly, even though no air moved through the room. The green glow pulsed from beneath the table, rhythmic and steady like a heartbeat. When I approached, the straps lifted slightly, rising an inch before falling back as though pulled by invisible fingers. A cold wave washed over me. Not from the room, but from the sudden realization that the glow brightened in sync with my breathing. Then, as if sensing my hesitation, the table shifted a fraction of an inch, metal legs squeaking softly, positioning itself to face me more directly. The table stilled, but the glow beneath intensified, spreading across the floor like a shallow pool of light. I circled it slowly, trying to find its source, but the shadows beneath thickened every time I leaned closer. A sudden clang broke the quiet, a metal tray falling from a counter near the wall. The sound rang out too sharply, echoing in the room longer than it should have. When I turned toward it, the green glow dimmed as though hiding itself. The tray lay upside down, rocking slightly, and scattered instruments glinted across the floor. One rolled toward me, spinning in a perfect line before stopping at my foot. As I bent to pick it up, a soft click echoed behind me, the familiar sound of a switch being flipped. The overhead lights snapped on at once, harsh and white, drowning the room in brightness. But the space where the table had been seconds earlier was now completely empty. The sudden disappearance left the room feeling hollow, as if something vital had been removed. The harsh lights buzzed overhead, too steady, too bright, creating a pressure behind my eyes. I backed toward the door, trying to retrace what I'd seen, but the floor seemed different now. Cleaner, clearer, almost polished. The green glow had vanished completely, leaving not even a stain or reflection. Just as I reached the doorway, a soft vibration pulsed through the wall, traveling upward like a signal, running through hidden veins of the building. The lights in the corridor outside flickered one by one, forming another guided path, this time stretching deeper than I'd gone before. A distant knock rang out, not metallic but hollow, like someone striking old wood. It echoed again, closer. Then again from the opposite direction. The building wasn't choosing a path for me anymore. It was closing every direction behind me. The knocks faded into a heavy quiet that felt thicker than any silence I'd heard so far, almost like the building held its breath to watch what I'd do next. The path of flickering lights stretched ahead, each bulb flaring just long enough to show the next turn before dimming again, creating a slow, pulsing rhythm that guided me deeper into the hospital's maze. As I moved forward, the walls seemed closer, pressing inward with a faint groan that traveled like a shiver along the ceiling pipes. The floor beneath my feet vibrated in small, uneven tremors, subtle but constant, as if something large stirred under the tiles. A soft rustle brushed the air behind me, not footsteps but the sliding drag of something pulling itself along the ground. I didn't turn. Whatever followed stayed just out of sight, matching my pace with a sound too steady to be accidental. The next hallway opened ahead, wider, darker, and waiting. The new hallway felt colder, with the temperature dropping so sharply it stung my fingertips. Frost clung to parts of the wall, forming thin, feathery lines that looked too delicate to belong in an abandoned place. As I walked, the frost patterns shifted, subtle, slow, curling into shapes that almost resembled fingerprints before fading again. A door at the end of the hall vibrated softly, not from force but from something tapping rhythmically on the other side. Each tap was faint, but I felt it in my chest more than my ears, like a second heartbeat syncing with mine. The lights overhead dimmed as I approached, shrinking the visible world into a tight cone. When I reached the door, the tapping stopped instantly, leaving only a low, rumbling breath that seeped through the crack beneath. The handle twitched once, a tiny metallic jerk, as though someone inside hooked a finger around it. The handle jerked again, sharper this time, and before I could react, the door swung inward on its own. A thick darkness filled the room, so complete it looked solid, absorbing the weak hallway light instead of bending it. I hesitated, then stepped inside, letting the door creak shut behind me. The darkness softened just enough to reveal shapes, rows of abandoned patient beds, curtains ripped and hanging at crooked angles, machines long dead, but still standing like silent witnesses. The air tasted metallic, as if rust had dissolved into dust. A low hum vibrated through the floor, rising and falling like a giant sleeping beneath the concrete. As I moved between the beds, one of the curtains drifted upward, floating slightly as though lifted by a breath from the center of the room. A second curtain followed, then a third, all rising slowly, not from wind, from something standing between them. The rising curtains froze midair, suspended like they were held by invisible hands. I didn't see anything between them, but the air thickened with a heavy tension, buzzing faintly against my skin. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, vibrating up through my legs as if warning me to move. I stepped back slowly, eyes locked on the empty space the curtains framed. The darkness there rippled, not with shape, but with movement, like a breath passing through smoke. Suddenly the lights in the ward snapped on all at once, too bright, too sudden, washing the room in a harsh glare. The curtains dropped instantly, slamming against the beds with a violent snap. A metal tray crashed somewhere behind me, skittering across the floor in a frantic, uneven path. I turned sharply, expecting someone to be there, but the floor was empty, except for a single wheelchair now positioned in the center of the room, facing me. The wheelchair sat perfectly still, angled just slightly as if inviting me to approach. I stayed where I was, watching for any hint of movement. The room held an impossible quiet, the kind that thickened the air until every breath felt too loud. Then the wheels creaked. Just once. A small, deliberate nudge forward. My pulse hammered as the chair edged again. Slow, hesitant, almost testing the floor. Behind me, one of the beds rattled, its metal frame shivering like something pushed against it from underneath. The hum in the floor shifted direction, spreading outward instead of upward, running toward the far wall, where a row of narrow windows lined the upper edge. Every window fogged over at the same time, clouding with a single synchronized breath. The wheelchair rolled one final inch, stopping at the exact midpoint of the room. Something wanted me to sit, or wanted something sitting there to stand. The silence after the wheelchair stopped felt heavier than the movement itself, as if the entire ward held still to wait for my reaction. I didn't move closer. Instead, I stepped back slowly, the floor protesting with a faint groan beneath my weight. The fog on the upper windows spread downward in thin streaks, as though something dragged its fingers along the glass from the other side. A soft clink echoed behind one of the beds, short, sharp, like metal tapping metal. Then another. A rhythm emerged, steady, unnervingly calm, and it guided my attention to the far wall, where a door I hadn't noticed before now stood slightly open. A pale light leaked through the gap, too warm compared to the cold air around me. The hum in the floor quieted, replaced by a faint vibration traveling from the crack under the door. It felt almost like a pulse, the kind that didn't belong to anything human. The warm glow spilling from the hidden door contrasted sharply with the sterile brightness of the ward, making it feel less like a light source and more like a breathing presence. I moved toward it cautiously, each step met with a soft vibration underfoot, as if whatever lay beyond sensed my approach. When I reached the crack, a faint whisper drifted through, too soft to form words, but steady enough to feel intentional. I pushed the door open slowly, revealing a narrow corridor unlike any other in the building. The walls here were smooth, freshly painted, untouched by decay. The air felt warmer, almost humid, carrying the faint smell of something chemical and sweet. The lights overhead glowed softly, flickering not with age, but with a deliberate pulse that matched the whispering rhythm. As I stepped inside, the door behind me shut with a gentle click. Not a slam, a choice. The corridor narrowed further until the walls nearly brushed my shoulders. The lights above brightened in soft waves, guiding my steps deeper into the passage. A faint hum grew louder as I continued, like machinery operating somewhere far below, but the tone was too organic, rising and falling with a rhythm that felt disturbingly alive. At the end of the hall stood another door, this one metal and sealed tight, with a small rectangular window fogged from the inside. Something shifted behind the glass, a vague shape moving slowly left to right, as if pacing. I approached carefully, and the fog on the window cleared in a single downward sweep, revealing nothing but an empty room. The hum stopped, the air still. Then a loud, hollow thud slammed against the door from the other side, shaking the frame. Whatever paced in that room wasn't gone. It was waiting for me to open the door. The thud echoed down the corridor long after the metal stopped vibrating. I stepped back, but the light above the door brightened suddenly, casting a long shadow across the floor that reached all the way to my feet. A faint clicking noise began inside the room, rapid, irregular, almost like nails tapping against metal. The sound grew faster, scattering across the walls and ceiling, circling the room on the other side of the door. Then everything stopped at once. Silence. Total, suffocating silence. The light dimmed. The window fogged again. My breath hitched as a single word whispered through the door. Soft, distorted. Impossible to tell if it was spoken by a voice or forced through the walls. The lights behind me flickered in a cascading pattern, one after another, urging me backward. But as I turned, the sealed door clicked loudly, unlocking itself. The lock slid fully open with a slow metallic grind, echoing down the narrow hallway like a warning stretched too thin. I held still, waiting to see if the door would push inward on its own. Instead, it creaked open only a few inches, just wide enough for warm air to spill out in a slow wave. The warmth carried a faint scent, sweet, chemical, almost familiar. But beneath it lingered something sharper, like old metal soaked in damp cloth. The lights overhead dimmed again, leaving the open door as the brightest point in the corridor. A soft shuffle whispered from inside the room, small and deliberate, like bare feet adjusting their position. The warmth intensified, touching my skin with an almost human closeness, making the narrow hall feel even tighter. Then a quiet breath drifted out through the opening, too close, too steady, as though someone stood just inches away, waiting for me to make the next move. The breath drifting from the narrow gap felt too controlled, too measured, as if whoever, or whatever, waited inside wanted me to hear it clearly. I stepped back, but the warm air followed in a slow, steady wave, brushing against my face like a hand searching the dark. The lights above flickered softer this time, pulsing in a pattern that reminded me of a heartbeat growing stronger. The metal door creaked another inch on its hinges, widening just enough for a shadow to shift across the floor. It stretched long and thin, moving not with my breath or the dim light, but with a rhythm of its own. I felt the corridor tighten around me, the walls closing in with every flicker of the overhead bulbs. A faint tapping began again inside the room, soft and precise, like fingers brushing along metal in a slow, counting motion. The breath stopped. The tapping stopped. Then a whisper slid through the opening, low, distant, and unmistakably calling me forward. The whisper faded, but the warmth spilling from the room deepened, thickening the air as I approached the door again. A soft hum vibrated the frame, steady and slow, like a hidden generator turning over beneath the floor. When I pushed the door open wider, the hinges groaned long and low, revealing a small chamber with smooth walls and a single overhead light flickering in a lazy rhythm. The scent inside grew stronger, chemical sweetness mixed with something sour, almost like old fabric left damp for too long. At the center of the room sat a chair, not metal or plastic, but padded and clean, untouched by the decay in the rest of the building. As I stepped inside, the door behind me eased shut without sound. The hum faded entirely. Then, from somewhere above the ceiling, a soft dragging noise began. Slow, deliberate, circling the chamber like something crawling through the walls in a tightening spiral. The dragging above grew louder, pacing in a slow rotation before stopping directly overhead. Dust sprinkled down, drifting through the flickering light like ash. I moved away from the chair, but the overhead bulb brightened sharply, framing it in a pale glow that felt almost demanding. The walls trembled lightly, a subtle shift, like something pressed against them from the outside. I tried the door, but it didn't budge. Not locked, just resisting, as if held shut by a pressure I couldn't see. A sharp tap struck the ceiling, then another, faster now, forming a steady beat like knuckles knocking rhythmically on hollow metal. The sound stopped abruptly. Then the padded chair scraped a full inch across the floor toward me, leaving a faint streak behind it. My breath froze. Before I could react, the lights blinked out completely, plunging the room into darkness, except for a thin outline of the chair now positioned directly in front of me. When the lights returned, the chair hadn't moved again, but the streak it left across the floor looked darker, smeared like something wet. I stepped back, and the walls gave a faint, brittle crack in response, as if something inside them had shifted under pressure. The air turned colder, losing all trace of the warm breath that had filled the corridor moments earlier. Then a soft whisper crept along the chamber, weaving through the air like wind, despite there being no airflow at all. It wrapped around me, faint at first, then growing clearer. Not words, but a tone, like a voice humming from deep below the floor. The humming stopped with a sudden drop. A groan rolled through the walls, followed by a sharp creak behind me. I turned just in time to see the door swing open slowly, revealing the hallway outside, now swallowed in near darkness, except for one single bulb flickering at the farthest end, waiting. The hallway beyond the chamber felt colder than before, as if the temperature dropped with every breath I took. I stepped out carefully, the floor tiles creaking underfoot with a fragile, splintering sound. The single flickering bulb at the far end pulsed brighter, then dimmed into a dull glow that barely pushed back the shadows. With each step I took toward it, the darkness behind me thickened, swallowing the doorway until it vanished completely. Something shifted in that darkness, a soft shuffle, then a second, paced with my movements. When I stopped, it stopped. The light ahead buzzed, sharp and angry, before flaring just long enough to reveal a figure-shaped shadow stretching unnaturally across the wall. It didn't belong to me. The bulb snapped off, plunging the hall into darkness. Then, from somewhere behind, a slow inhale filled the silence, deep and deliberate, close enough that I felt it move the air at my back. The slow inhale behind me tightened every muscle in my body, but I didn't turn. The darkness felt alive now, pushing against my back with a pressure that grew heavier with every second. The faint glow from the dying bulb ahead returned in a weak pulse, barely enough to outline the corridor, but it revealed something new. The tiles beneath my feet shifting subtly, rising and settling like the ground itself. Was, breathing. A thin crack formed along the wall to my left, stretching upward in a smooth, deliberate line until dust sprinkled down in a steady fall. I edged forward, trying to keep my footsteps quiet, but the inhale followed each movement, mirroring my pace with eerie precision. The hall twisted slightly ahead, leading to another open space I hadn't seen before. The bulb flickered one last time, then snapped off completely. In the instant the light died, something close behind me exhaled slowly, as if relieved I could no longer see. The next stretch of hallway opened into a wide diagnostic room, the kind once used for scans and evaluations. The machines here were silent hulks, coated in dust but positioned too neatly, as if someone had arranged them after the building was abandoned. The floor held faint trails, thin lines in the dust showing something had moved through recently. Something dragged rather than walked. I stepped inside, and the overhead light flickered to life with a sharp buzz, casting a pale circle across the center of the room. A long diagnostic bed stood there, straps dangling from its sides like limp, waiting hands. As I moved closer, the straps lifted slightly, slow and subtle, as if stirred by breath rather than air. The distant inhale returned behind me, deeper now, resonating through the machines with a low metallic shiver. Then a soft click echoed from the far corner, where a monitor that hadn't worked in decades flickered on and displayed a single pulsing line. The monitor's pulsing line beat slow and steady, almost hypnotic, and its glow painted the room in sharp, unnatural shadows. I stepped toward it, and the machines around me hummed faintly, each emitting a low vibration as though waking from a long sleep. The line on the screen spiked sharply the moment I reached the console, then flattened into silence. A sudden metallic pang rang through the room, followed by another, rhythmically spaced, like something tapping the machines one by one. The straps on the examination bed tightened, coiling inward with a soft hiss before falling limp again. When I turned back toward the hallway, the entrance had darkened entirely, the shadows gathering into a single thick shape that blocked the way out. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It simply stood there, hollow and tall, as though made of the hall's darkness itself. The monitor behind me crackled, and the pulsing line reappeared, now beating faster. The shadow holding the doorway didn't advance, but the darkness around it pulsed like waves, swelling and shrinking in time with the monitor's rising rhythm. I stepped back slowly, feeling the machines at my sides vibrate harder, their metal frames shaking with a low, resonant warning. The shadow shifted, not forward, but inward, collapsing slightly before stretching tall again as though adjusting its shape. A soft scraping noise filled the room, circling me in a tightening loop. Though nothing moved on the floor, the overhead light flickered violently, casting quick flashes that revealed the shadow, thinning, splitting, widening, never settling on one form. I reached for the nearest machine to steady myself, but the moment my hand touched it, the monitor's pulse spiked into a sharp, continuous tone that stabbed through the silence. The shadow twisted sharply toward me. The light snapped off. Then something brushed my arm. Cold, precise, deliberate. The touch lingered for a heartbeat before sliding away, leaving a cold ache that sank beneath my skin. When the lights burst back on, the shadow was gone, but the room felt wrong, emptier, heavier, as if something had stepped out of it and into the air around me. The monitor displayed a new line now, a curve instead of a pulse, rising upward in a smooth arc like a signal building strength. The machines hummed louder, vibrating so fiercely the floor trembled under my feet. A deep groan echoed through the hallway beyond, spreading through the walls like a massive shifting weight. I backed toward the entrance, and for the first time, the path behind me cleared, lights flickering in a rapid sequence that formed an unmistakable direction leading back the way I'd come. It felt less like an escape route, and more like the building pushing me out, ushering me away from whatever had just awakened. But as I reached the doorway, one last sound followed me. A slow inhale, deep and familiar, too close to ignore.